Chapter 13. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. Albert Einstein, German physicist and intellectual. 3 days of searching turned up nothing. So many places came close, but something was always different from the picture. It had the wrong type of roof, or different windows, or no chimney at all. It seemed like everything built since the war looked alike, and the building in the drawing appeared older than that. About a half-mile east of my school was a street of older homes, but I didn't see the one from the drawing among them. I was beginning to wonder if this building really existed, at least in East Berlin. The fourth day was another Saturday, a week since I'd last seen Papa. Mama sent me to school with a loaf of bread to give to Anna's family. It wasn't much, but it was all we had to spare. And Mama wouldn't have dared offer more anyway. Anna's family was still being shamed for what Peter had done. Mama didn't want it to look like our family were that close. But Anna wasn't in school that day, and the teacher said she had complained the day before of not feeling well. So I decided to deliver the bread on the way home this afternoon. At least it gave me the opportunity to walk a different neighborhood of Berlin, and a part of me hoped that her sorrows healed. So would our friendship. Anna met me at the door, and although she looked as healthy as anyone else, I didn't question her. If I could get away with faking sickness to skip school, I'd do it every day and not feel a hint of guilt. Before Anna slammed the door, I shoved the loaf of bread at her. "This is from my mother," I said lamely. "She thought your family might want it." She didn't seem too enthusiastic about accepting it, and though I wanted to believe the Stasi couldn't find anything wrong with my mother's simple gift, I wasn't that naive. Not anymore. But whether she wanted it or not, the bread was in Anna's hands now, and the only way she could refuse it would be to drop it on the floor or hurl it back at me. If she did, I wouldn't have cared much. All Mama had asked was that I give her the bread, not force her to keep it. Finally, Anna mumbled, "Thank you." She started to close the door, but I put a foot on the jamb to block it. "I'm sorry Peter's gone, but you shouldn't be ashamed of what he tried to do." Though I hadn't planned to say that, the words poured out of me. The thoughts had swirled in my head for so long, it was a relief to speak them. And at least I was careful to keep my voice low. He wanted a better life, a free life. You can't blame him for that. Or at least, I don't. "We have a good life here," Anna said. "Why wasn't it enough for him?" I explained it to her the way Fritz explained it to me long ago. "You've seen the sun, Anna. Now that you have, could you ever be content with just the stars for light? Would that be enough for you?" Anna bit her lip and her eyes darted both ways along the hallway. If anyone had been there, she'd already have shut the door on me. When she was sure that we were alone, she whispered, "The night he tried escaping, Peter left a letter for us on his bed. The Stasi have it now, but his roommate at the university found it first and told us what it said. The final line was, 'If I don't stand for freedom, then I must sit in chains.' Is that what you believe too, Gerda?" Of course I did. We were in chains, even if she couldn't see them. I spent 6 days a week in a school that taught me freedom was a lie, and every minute in public pretending I believed it. She knew the consequences for speaking out just as I did. Why else was Herr Kraus arrested? And there was the wall. If life was so terrible beyond it, then why force us to stay here? But I couldn't say any of this to her. Not anymore. Anna seemed to already have the answer for her question. Her gaze hardened. "I told my parents the real people in chains were those who break our laws. They must know they're going to be caught sooner or later." Suddenly, our simple conversation began to sound like an accusation. I wasn't sure why. As far as I knew, I wasn't breaking any laws. None of the big ones, anyway. A door opened down the hall, and I turned to see who was coming. In that instant, Anna slammed the door shut, and I became a disease again. I marched from her apartment with a few unkind phrases in mind that I wished I'd said while I had the chance. She was practically quoting the state's propaganda, no better than a puppet on their string. Besides, I had only brought bread, not smuggled goods or revolutionary pamphlets. No secret messages were baked inside, and we asked for nothing in return. It was only bread. And yet she had treated me like I'd brought the plague. No, she believed something worse, that wherever I went, the Stasi would eventually follow. That was a ridiculous idea, wasn't it? I decided to take a cut home, which sent me down a narrow alley that I usually avoided because of the leftover rubble from the bombings at the end of the last war. But this time, all I wanted was to get home and slam my bedroom door behind me and try to forget I had ever been friends with Anna. Except where I should have turned back onto the main road, I looked further down the alley and saw it led to the back of some other older buildings. I'd never been on this abandoned street before, yet it still felt familiar. Walking faster to keep pace with my racing heartbeat, I took in the details of one particular building. It was old and square and made of brick and looked like it would crumble if hit by a strong enough wind. Two long windows ran up the back, and a chimney going up the side was made of a darker colored brick. The three square windows at ground level were boarded up, and once I left the alley, it was easy to see why. The building now served as part of the Berlin Wall. Tall cinder-block rows butted up directly against the old building, and the barbed wire emerged from the wall all the way up and over the top of the building. I could only assume the front of the building was inside the death strip, and that it was sealed up too. Two more old buildings connected in a row to the building in front of me, then the wall continued on from there. The ground where I stood looked like a small patch of forgotten farmland. It was infested with weeds, some that were almost as tall as me. Halfway to the road, a deep irrigation ditch supplied a small pond. Far to the left, and behind the wall, was a watchtower, which I knew from all my previous observations was always staffed with Grenzers, who constantly looked out for anyone getting too near the wall. But they'd need binoculars to see me well, and there didn't appear to be a border zone here, or at least nothing was marked to keep us away from the wall, and the tire tracks from the Grenzers patrol didn't look too recent. My eyes flicked back to the building in front of me as my heart pounded with possibilities. This was the place my father had wanted me to find, and something was buried inside it. I didn't know what, but the first chance I got to return with Mama's shovel, I intended to find out. So, my question to you at the end of chapter 13: what did Gerda do differently on her way home that led to her finding the right building that Papa wanted her to find? If you need to pause the video and back up a little bit to find the answer, that's all right. This will be on your Google form at the end of your reading. Chapter 14: Who wagers nothing, he wins nothing. German proverb. My opportunity came the following morning. It was Sunday, and Mama had plans to go to church. She never invited us along, not because she didn't want us there, but because she knew the state frowned on religion. They wouldn't push her for being in church, not directly anyways, but she thought it might somehow affect Fritz and me. Another stain in our files. Fritz said he plans to meet up with some friends, which I think included a girl named Claudia. The only things I knew about her was she sold bicycles and wore her hair in the bouffant style, like young women in the West. I overheard Fritz's friends teasing him about her, and by his reaction, it was obvious that he liked Claudia a lot. The minute he left, I hurried down to the basement of our apartment, grabbed our shovel, and left for that old building in Papa's picture. I had hoped for an uneventful walk there, but a young girl hauling a big shovel through the city is hardly inconspicuous. I hadn't even left my own block when Frau Eberhardt, a woman who lived in our apartment building, greeted me and asked, "Where are you going with that? Does your mother know what you're up to?" Frau Eberhardt always looked to me like the human version of a turkey, minus the feathers. She collected gossip like other women might collect buttons or teacups. In the West, she'd have been dismissed as a simple busybody or snooping neighbor. But behind the wall, we all knew the neighborhood tattler was as dangerous as fire. Stasi informants were paid well. I wanted to surprise my mother," I stammered. "I found an area for a garden just a few streets away." Inwardly, I kicked myself for the way my voice had trembled as I lied, for looking anywhere but at her. No, I was supposed to be smarter than this. Papa expected more of me. Somehow, knowing he would want me to lie made it easier. Frau Eberhardt's beak of a mouth pursed together as if she wasn't quite sure whether I had told the truth. I was sure she could read the deceit that was almost certainly written all over my face. But this wouldn't be my last lie. Mama often warned me that the Stasi had blanketed the country with informants. It might be a bus driver, or a coworker, or even a family member, and it wouldn't have surprised me in the least if the woman I was facing ran off to the Stasi to tattle on me, if she guessed real reasons for my shovel. Finally she smiled. "A garden is delightful surprise for your mother, but if you want me to keep your secret, then I'll expect some of the harvest." Maybe that was just a polite conversation and was totally meaningless, or maybe she wanted a bribe for her silence. I really didn't know. Either way, it presented a problem since there wasn't going to be any harvest. All I could do was avoid bumping into her again for a long time. Forever, if I could arrange it. Once I spotted the building, I did a careful check for any officers in the area. This time, fresh tire tracks ran through the crusty dirt, so I knew they had come through only last night. Hopefully, that meant they wouldn't feel the need to come back around any time soon. I got as close to the Berlin Wall as I dared, but not because I was challenging the Grenzers. Just the opposite, in fact. I knew if any eyes looked down on this area, then the closer I stood to the wall, the better chance I would have of slipping past them unnoticed. For my own safety, I would use their barricade against them. My heart was locked in my throat as I crossed to the building, but nothing suggested that anyone had seen me. No sirens or barking dogs or soldiers shouting orders. After a tense moment, I finally allowed myself to breathe again. Like all the others around it, the building looked like an old shop that had been abandoned for longer than I'd been alive, and there was no reason for anyone to come to this out of the way street. I crouched beside each of the ground level windows and pressed at the boards, hoping for one that seemed loose. The first two windows were still boarded up tight, but the third seemed to have some give. I had to use the shovel to pry the boards loose, but I finally managed to open up a small gap, then slide through it. Once inside, I had a short jump onto the hard dirt floors. It smelled of mold and rotting wood from the floorboards above me, and the standing water in the corners probably still hadn't dried out from winter. The only light came in slivers between the wood boards across the windows and painted, creepy, dusty shadows. It gave me a shiver, though I couldn't be sure if that was because the room was chilly or because I was afraid. No matter how eerie the room was, I also knew full well that the boundary for the Berlin Wall ran straight through this building. If I touched the brick on the far end of this room, I would be standing within the line of the death strip. In fact, I thought the Grenzers would probably consider this entire building inside that forbidden zone. If so, then I was in the death strip now. I wanted to leave, or just to climb back out the window and run to safety in my bedroom. I never had to tell anyone about this place, and the next time I saw my father, I could just shrug at him as if I'd never gotten that picture. He could go forward with his life, and I would go forward with mine. But now that I was here, I knew I couldn't do that. Papa wanted me to find this building, and he wanted me to dig here. I wasn't sure why he had chosen this place, but it was important enough to let me take the risk of standing here. It had to be good, an entire chest full of money, or better yet, fake passports that would allow us an easy slide across the border, or something better that I could dream of, something he believed was worth the risk of my life. A crumbling stone stairway led to the main floor above me. I poked my head up there, and in printed old paint on the wall was a faded sign that simply said, Willkommen. In that moment, I named this place in my mind the Welcome Building. The main floor was empty except for piles of old brick. The same brick filled every window and door open facing onto the death strip. There was enough brick so they could have sealed up all the back window openings too. Maybe they'd give up before they finished. Another stairway went to the upper level, an attic maybe, but nothing would ever get me up there where I was even more exposed. I crept back downstairs on the hunt for Papa's treasure. After choosing my starting place, I raised the shovel, stuck the tip of the blade into the dirt, and crunched my foot down on the blade's shoulder. But in the hard earth, it didn't even go down a full centimeter. I tried again, pushing harder, and even jumping onto it, using all my weight to force the blade into the ground, but nothing I did made any difference. It was like digging through a concrete with a spoon. I moved the shovel to a different spot and tried again, but still with no success. The same thing happened in another corner. It was quickly becoming obvious that my father hadn't buried a single thing in this basement, not unless he had done it 30 years ago, because I was convinced this hard ground hadn't been disturbed for at least that long. I tried in still another place, right in the center of the room. This time my blade struck something metal. It rattled enough that I quickly fell to my knees to quiet the echoing vibrations. I dropped the shovel and ran my fingers along the ground, feeling for the edges of the metal. Whatever it was, it lay nearly at the surface with only a thick layer of dust to cover it. If my father was going to bury something to be kept secret from the Stasi, he could have done better than putting it right at the surface. Anyone might find it this way. Then my heart dropped as I realized another possibility. Maybe this treasure had already been discovered, and the only empty container remained. I had found the edges now, some sort of metal plank wide enough to stand on. Then I brushed off the dirt. I saw grooves cut into one side and hinges on the other. This wasn't a plank. It was a door, buried in the earth. Curiosity was mounting inside my chest so much that I almost couldn't stand it. I pried the door up with the shovel and then pulled it the rest of the way open. The door was heavier than I had imagined, but I was certain that something inside would make all the risk and effort worth it. With some effort, I got the door open. I peered down, but it led to a hole too deep to see the bottom, with a rusty metal ladder on the side that I didn't entirely trust to hold my weight. Nor did I have any interest in diving into some unknown darkness without knowing whether I could get back up again, and with nobody in the world aware of where I was. I wished I had a flashlight. I walked around it to try to get a better sense of what was down there, then happened to notice dim writing stamped onto the underneath side of the door. Luftschutzraum, an air raid shelter. There were hundreds of them all over Berlin, places built underground during the Second World War, when the Allies began bombing the city. There was nothing special about them. We had one under our own apartment building, in fact, and so did Anna. So there was no reason, none at all, why my father would go to the trouble of putting anything special inside this one so far from home. I closed up the door and even scattered dirt across it again, and then did my best to erase any evidence that I had been here. Obviously, I had misunderstood my father's instructions. Whatever his meaning was with the silly dances and the picture, I couldn't understand it. Maybe there was no meaning. Maybe his dance was only a dance, and this picture was only a picture. It might not even be from him at all. If I was reading secret messages into it, that was only a sign of my boredom and desire to find some lost connection to my father. I climbed out of the basement, pulled the boards back that had blocked the window back into place, and stashed the shovel beneath some rubble in the alleyway so I wouldn't have to answer any questions about it on my way home. I hadn't lost hope. No, that wasn't the right word for it. It wasn't lost because I didn't intend to try finding it again. As I walked home that morning, I simply accepted the reality that it was wrong for me to have ever had hope in the first place. At the end of chapter 14, this is the question I'm asking you to fill out on your Google form. What did Gerda tell Frau Eberhardt that she was using the shovel to do? Why would this be a problem in the future? On your Google form, please write in full sentences. These are the two questions for chapter 14.